So today on the No Emotion podcast, we have Ricardo Correa. He's the MD and global head of CBDCs and digital currencies at R3. Now, I know on this channel, we have talked at length about R3 and the importance of it in this new world, the platforms being created. And I guess the first question, well, thank you for being here, first of all.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I would really love for you to be able to give the introduction to someone who doesn't know what CBDCs are, just to say, what are CBDCs and how are they going to impact our life?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Lewis. It's great to be here. So CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. I suppose the simplest way to think about it, if you're new to it, is it's a digital form of cash, and it acts just like cash. It's a cash instrument, but it's digital, and typically you'll kind of interact with it on your phone as you do with other kind of wallets and other payment instruments. So how did it come about? 2019, really July, seminal moment. I think Facebook announced Project Libra, and that really changed the narrative within the public sector around how important it was to explore central bank digital currency as kind of honestly a threat of private money really starting to take hold. It's not to say that we don't have private money today, of course, because most of our money is from commercial banks. But this is big tech getting into kind of money. So that was really the moment, July, we started to see a lot more research into central bank digital currencies. So, it's a cash-like instrument. It's a third form of cash. Today, we have two forms of cash, or rather two forms of money. We have cash, like notes and coins. When we have reserves, that's the central bank that manages the reserves and issues cash. And now we have a third form of money, potentially, CBDCs, which is, again, a cash-like instrument, but it's digital.
Yeah.
So how your second question, I think, was how can it impact? Was that right?
Yeah.
Is that right? So yeah, that is a great question. I suppose if you unpack that, if in terms of business institutions or organizations, there's clear impact and positive impact. Things like, settlement are a big deal. Payments settle during the day, either intraday or end of day. And there's all this risk in payment systems. It's a big space to unpack. But I think if you bifurcate, the impact on businesses and organizations, there's more clarity there around settlement in particular, especially if you couple that with digital assets. For you and me, it becomes kind of a really interesting question. So do we need another form of money? We have lots of forms of money. But then, you have to look at it country by country. I think every single country is looking at it slightly differently. So the impacts will be different depending on where you are. The Bank of England just recently released their paper around their model. Looks kind of interesting. I think the biggest benefit so far as we talk about is this notion of smart money, programmable money. What does that mean to Lewis and Ricardo? Well, we can put rules around money and our money acts on our behalf whilst we sleep, and it does clever stuff. So on the retail side, there's this promise, but it's kind of a little opaque at the moment.
What do you think about that programmable side of things? Do you, working at this ground level, like working very involved, I don't know how much communication you personally have with the commercial banks and the systems that they're operating in and trying to link those.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any potential for malicious behavior?
Oh, malicious behavior as a result of programmable money?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I try not to get conspiratorial about it.
But we can. We should just have an open conversation. Things like surveillance money, these kind of things, we can unpack all of that. But your first question was what I think about programmable money. Makes a lot of sense on the wholesale side. Right. So again, if you bifurcate wholesale, retail, on the wholesale side, it makes sense. Right. On the retail side, very kind of sensitive. Money today doesn't have any rules around it. Right. If I go and withdraw $100 from the ATM, I can use that money for any product or service that's available to me without anyone surveying that or having a look at that. And the Bank of England makes a good kind of point around the issuance of a potential Bank of England CBDC would not carry any programmable kind of money from the central bank. But the commercial banks may add a substrate of programmability on top of that. And I kind of do today. I mean, those things get kind of blurry, but, CBDCs generally, you say, well, wow, now the central bank's going to issue money and they'll be able to see everything. Now, let's just look at some stats. Today, probably, Lewis, you use maybe 10% of your payments are in cash, if that. 90% are in, digital forms of money, using your apps, going online, making payments. All of that money today is surveyed, so to speak. It's not surveyed, that's the wrong word, but the point is it's digital, so it leaves kind of a footprint, a fingerprint, right, every time you use it by the commercial bank. CBDCs would be no different, right?
Yes,
So
however,
carry exactly.
I want to, well, I would just ask what you know about this, because when the whole idea of this updating of the ISO 20022 messaging standard, we've dived deep into the documentation about all of that, and one of the key things that comes out of that for me as pertinent is the idea that this whole new messaging format is to include is to create a more data-rich message in the payments, and part of that data-rich message includes elements like the digital token identifier, which actually only appeared on a certain patent about how a normal financial message can interact with a blockchain to identify the token in question. And so the way I see all of that is, if we're looking at a data-rich environment in a blockchain environment, it seems like if the information that they've already surveilled us with, right? I'm not saying they do, but the information that exists in the old system is just going to increase the amount of information they have, just by the nature of the extra data that's going to be in the messaging and how it links into the blockchain, which is kind of forever existing, always viewable, publicly viewable. It seems like we're going to be surveilled more, if that is the intent.
I mean, just to clarify a few points, when you say publicly available, so the technologies that we work on are private, permissioned, so not publicly available.
Yeah, good distinction.
So just to be clear on that, because it's an important point. But arguably, you're right, Lewis. Like, are we going to get, like, first of all, are we becoming more digital or less digital? Okay, well, we can easily answer that question. And do we leave a much longer digital data trail now, right? We're able to capture as much information as we want, really. And yes, arguably, you're right. But then it's how we treat that information.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's how we treat that information, and kind of the policies and the regulation that we put in place, and the legal constructs that are put in place in order to allow us to feel more comfortable. But when these things are somewhat really complex. You can go surveyed money. You can survey cash today. Apparently, so far as the research suggests, your fingerprint can stay on a dollar note for a very long time, years. So, if there was a nefarious activity, there's a bundle of cash, and you wanted to understand where that cash came from, well, you could go through the effort of looking at all the fingerprints on all those notes, and then tracing that all the way back. It's the same thing, but yes, there's more data for sure. And I think, again, country by country, you'll see different positions, right, with respect to how we treat that data. The ISO 20022 standard, of course, is introduced for payments globally and generally is a standard. More data is captured there. On a blockchain, you can capture a whole bunch of data. But yeah, I think we're still working through all of that.
Yeah.
We want to ensure is that the values that we have in cash are the same values that carry through to kind of CBDCs.
Absolutely. This, I don't know how technical to go, because also I'm an outsider. I'm not part of the inner workings of anything. Right. How do you actually attach a Swift message to a CBDC platform? Like,
oh wow, interesting question. You don't attach it per se. I mean, Swift has a gateway, like an API. So in its most simple form, it's an API, and you can interact with Swift through this API. And so if you're on a blockchain and you're like, hey, I've got to send a payment to Lewis and he's in, the UK and Ricardo's in the US, I can reach out to Swift, make a payment, wait for an instruction that comes back, and then continue my flow on the chain. But yeah, it's just you just call out to an API.
Yeah. Okay.
In its most simple form.
Yeah, that's confirming what I believed without having heard it from anyone involved.
Right.
So you've worked on some other some projects at R3 that we've been very interested in on this channel.
Mm-hmm.
The eKrona, was Project Jura, Project Dunbar, which we've covered heavily.
Right.
Project Hell. I always
Helvetia.
struggle with it. How do you say it?
Helvetia.
Helvetia. In my brain, I always think Helvetica, like the font.
Ah,
It's really annoying when I see
yeah,
it.
perhaps,
Um,
yeah.
which project have you become most excited about in terms of its actual involvement in the new system that we're moving towards?
Right. Well, they're all explored different aspects of kind of the landscape. So, let's just unpack some of that. So Jura was a cross-border. That one was really cool, really interesting. It was really long, like 18 months, of kind of, trying to get a simple payment to go through. We spent, just a bit of time on the tech and then a lot of time on the policy and the legal. Kind of when you think about interoperability, typically you go, oh, the tech, but actually interoperability is a whole layer cake of stuff. It's like, how do you interrupt the legal systems? How do you interrupt the policy systems? What about the playbooks and the white kind of lists, etc.? So, that was really cool. I think what Jura gave us was, in summary, the ability to do a cross-atomic swap of money without money leaving its jurisdiction, meaning that you can issue money in a country and make sure that it doesn't ever leave your jurisdictional boundary, but you can have that money be used to settle obligations on other networks.
Yeah.
Right. So that's really cool. And the model for that kind of came out of that project, as well as the tech and some of the legal stuff, as I mentioned. Dunbar, I think Dunbar is a really interesting idea, a multi kind of central bank issuance network, where central banks can kind of leverage, well, there's a few use cases there. One of them is swap lines, central banks paying central banks. The other is, the ability of having kind of a multi-currency network, right? That permeates all the way down to the commercial banks and then eventually retail. So, fluid kind of, hey, Lewis wants USD for this payment, but he's going to use Euro for that one. Then he's going to use USD for that one. And it's just nice and simple and fluid.
Yeah.
That's a long way off. It's more at the central bank level. So that's Dunbar. If you look at, eKrona's motivations are different. The very sharp decline of cash, less than 1% usage of cash. And, if you look at this thing from the outside, you start to think about the relevance of the central bank and the money that the central bank provides. On the reserve side and the wholesale side, it's clear. But for the retailer, if I'm not using cash anymore, how does the central bank participate? And then how does monetary policy kind of flow through, et cetera? So those are some of the motivations on eKrona. And then Helvetia was simple. Helvetia was, hey, how do I integrate to the current system today? Right, the RTGS system for settlement. How do I integrate to that? And then let's test kind of an end-to-end workflow. I issue the money. Well, first of all, I mint it, then I issue it, then it's used in some transactions, then it's redeemed, and then I burn it. And what does that life cycle look like? So yeah, lots of different things that we've learned from these projects.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch from the sidelines. It's just I think what R3 are doing is completely undervalued in the scheme of things. It's
thanks,
really
Lou.
really cool to watch.
Yeah, it is cool. It's very cool.
Yeah. So I've got maybe a bit of a proby question here.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that idea of the regulation side of things needs to be interoperable. I saw a clip at the World Economic Forum type thing. There was a guy called Klaas Knot,
Mhm.
And he was saying, essentially, for this all to work, there needs to be a global framework for regulation.
Yeah.
Um, it seems to me that the technology is the easy thing to sort out, because
Yeah,
that's
you're right.
really
It's much easier
kind of just
now.
linking APIs. To simplify it, really, you have your technology, link it up with where it needs to link, and then you can do your payments. The legal process, the legal framework required, actually requires the whole globe to be on the same page.
Mm.
This is really difficult. But the one thing that I can see as being a way to reduce the amount of trust required with each individual country, you essentially have a system where the asset in the middle, the blockchain in the middle, the 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 direction is all focused on a protocol or a system that everyone trusts without having to trust each other. It would make me believe that when you're settling funds, settling payments at this scale, the asset itself has to be agnostic. It can't be it can't be owned by any country, if you know what I mean. It has to be a cross-border in nature. I wanted to see if you would be able to shed a light onto the actual technology being used, the blockchains
Mm.
being used, the importance of interoperability and all of that, and the importance of the agnostic nature of said assets.
Wow, that's a really interesting agnostic asset. I think that's, yeah. Let me get to that one kind of last, because I think
Okay.
there's a few things that come to mind immediately. This one of, today the way that money works, it's sovereign. The UK has the pound, of course, Europe, the euro, the USD, and they all carry different value, and they all have a different set of attributes and so on. But more importantly, it gives kind of countries their ability to kind of manage monetary policy, create stability, domestically, etc. So a global instrument would require a rethink of that entire thing to a
Yeah.
degree. But I can kind of see where you're going with that. So, what's important, I think, is the one thing that'll unlock this opportunity is interoperability. Now, whilst we say the technology is not the big thing to consider right now, I'd agree with you, other than a few little bits that are left, like interop, like a standard way that assets are fluid across boundaries. And I think that's the first goal. Before you can get to a global asset, I don't think we're going to get there right now. I think the very next step is, hey, money works the way it works. There's these legal constructs and these political constructs that need to stay in place. Because if we attack that and we go, hey, it's going to change all of that, we'll be here for a lifetime, right? But we can say we'll keep those constructs. We'll issue a digital form of what we have today in terms of paper, a little bit like Lewis used to have to sign things with his pen. Now we accept digital signatures, sorry, right? And so that carries a legal a legal stamp of approval, so to speak. Same with money, we'll keep the constructs, but what's important is to allow the interoperability, the seamless interoperability of those instruments. So, that's key on the tech side, and we're getting really close to that. We've been working on that for a really long time. There's a bunch of organizations doing a bunch of stuff, right? That is really cool, and we need to coalesce around a standard, and you'll probably see that in the next 12 to 18 months. Certainly, one or two potential standards that will emerge, which is cool on the tech side. And then on the reg and the legal side, it's going to be a case by case, meaning that, country A wants to work with country B. And, as we saw with Jura, and you'll go about setting those bridges. And then over time, you'll have, a network of interoperable legal and political systems that have been put in place that create a global mesh. Now, that may be complicated, but it's going to allow us to move faster, so to speak, because we don't have to go and change those things. But it's eventually, do we change that? I don't know. It's too far out to think about a global instrument, like a global dollar. Right? This thing allows me to go, yes, crypto. I mean, we can move into the crypto side as well. Crypto allows you to do that to a degree, but also crypto is pretty siloed as well. Bitcoin and Bitcoin, Ethereum and Ethereum. It's not easily cross-pollinated,
Yep.
right? Yes, you can go and exchange these things through central exchanges, but that's about it.
Yeah, and this is the interoperability is being, I guess, worked on by the likes of the what do you call it, ILP, Interledger Protocol. There's Atomic.
There's been many attempts. The ILP, the ILP and ITU's doing stuff. We're doing stuff. Swift's doing stuff.
Yeah.
Everyone's kind of, everyone recognizes the value of interop and what that will unlock.
So what kind of timeline do you see for when your definition of true interoperability, when does that start happening? Or when does that complete? When do you see that?
Wow, when is that complete?
I'm not holding you to what you say. It's just kind of like
listen, I don't think there's a point of completion. I think there's a point of start. A point of starting on a new set of interoperability models and approaches that eventually create kind of a global standard. A bit like, it's taken us ages to get to ISO 20022. I mean, that's a big standard for payments. It'll take us a while, but I think, from where I'm sitting, I'd say to you that you'll start to see pockets of organizations and networks and assets that are coming together in a multilateral way versus a bilateral. So today we've seen a lot of bilaterals, like, hey, this one talks to that one, and we create these bridges, and it's like, good, correct. Bridges are hard, they brittle, and then at scale they don't really make a hell of a lot of sense. But you'll start to see, I'd say to you, in the next 18 months, you'll start to see pockets of interoperability opportunities that start to look like, this could be a kind of an emerging standard to some degree, or at least contribute to an emerging standard.
And would this be mostly on the central bank's payment side? Like, I don't see the retail being affected.
No, not on the good. That's a good point of clarity. It'll be mainly on the wholesale side that you'll start to see that, before it kind of trickles through down to the retail. I mean, listen, the very latest project, Icebreaker. I don't know whether you've seen Icebreaker. That's pretty cool.
I've seen it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Even that, you kind of think about, well, that is a contribution to interoperability, because it's a way for FX to be treated in a much more kind of efficient way, right? So today it's kind of, it's a ask bid system where you're looking for best price, as opposed to an automated auction, so to speak, that happens kind of, much more efficiently. So that's just on the FX side. So we need all these little bits to come together, for interop to really kind of be complete, so to speak. But I don't think we're ever going to get to that point anytime soon.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. It's just good to have different time frames. I think for a lot of my audience are, investing in the space, so it's kind of having an idea for when the gratification may come, so because it seems to be delaying all the time.
I know, and I mean, there's so many factors at play. Timelines for us, within 18 to 24 months, we're going to see a step change in certain areas for sure.
Are you able to share what those areas are?
Well, I mean, you've heard the ECB talk about what they're doing. You've heard, the Bank of England's got a much longer timeline. You've got some countries claiming, that they will be in a pilot kind of, in 2024. You look at what the Bank of Brazil is doing. You look at what some of the APAC countries are doing. So it kind of feels to us that there's a lot more momentum behind this for many, many different reasons. And maybe what's kind of more kind of sensible is a 24 to 36 month timeline.
Yeah.
But I'm optimistic by nature. So for me, I'm saying, within 18 to 24 months, we have some ability to influence some of that, to a degree. I'd like to see that happen.
Right. And when you're working on the tech side, the way the value actually is transmitted through the platform, are there any standout technologies that are being used on the blockchain side that are kind of truly shaping the way that things are going to go? Because, for example, if you're using Ethereum for the transmission of value, you quickly realize this is maybe not so efficient because it's going to cost so much money unless we use the virtual machine and get that through XDC. That's really that's part of the interoperability, but certain blockchains will stand out, I'm assuming.
Yes. Well, I mean, first of all, you step back and you imagine that there's going to be, a few different technologies that'll emerge as the new kind of stack, the new plumbing, so to speak, right? Central databases today with message queues, and there's a whole technology set that today is the stack for money. And you imagine that there's going to be a new emerging stack, right? And that's going to be the new stack. And that stack will be comprised of, we believe, multiple technologies, because you've got multiple tools for different tasks. Private permissioned networks make sense for wholesale payments, right? Where the central bank needs to be able to have, visibility and control of money in wholesale. And then as it then gets distributed to retail, maybe those are different technologies, as we have today, right? You've got an app on your phone. It's a different technology to how the central bank issues money or how the commercial bank deposits your cash and kind of their accounts. All different technologies for different reasons. What technologies, I think a few things need to be solved. Performance, right? Because it's, if you're thinking about retail payments, you need a really, really well-run, efficient kind of performance stack. So performance is definitely something we continue to work on. Privacy, super kind of, to the way we started this conversation, back to the beginning, surveillance and privacy. So ZKPs is a technology that's emerging. It's pretty exciting. Confidential compute as well. Two different technologies kind of for privacy. I think those are important pieces to consider. So performance, privacy, those are the two kind of main ones that come to mind. And then, of course, interop, like making sure that it all works really seamlessly together.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can feel free not to answer this question, but how are you positioning yourself for the future based on the technologies that you're using day in, day out, where you see it going? Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, you got to look at it different lenses. I think if you look at it at the wholesale side, what's happening behind the light switch, you and I use the light switch like, hey, look, the lights came on, but all the infrastructure that's behind that light switch is tremendously complex. And so what's happening behind the light switch, so to speak, I'm optimistic about, and I feel that there's, tremendous opportunity for the folks that have been in this space for a long time, that have built some credibility and built some muscle around what needs to be done and how this is going to kind of roll out. I think there's tremendous opportunity. I see today, a much fewer set of technologies that have emerged to be the viable stack. Okay. A few things have fallen away over the last 24 months.
Okay.
So I'm optimistic in that sense. The private permission nature of wholesale money makes a lot of sense, but still we're exploring what the rest of it looks like. So, there's space for public, there's space for private, there's space for a whole bunch of different models. And again, it's not just one brush, for everybody. I think every single country will have a slightly different approach. We're seeing that clearly now. So yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic that there will be enough space for different models to emerge as the new stack for money.
Interesting. And I think that's we like to almost silo ourselves in the crypto world with specific assets and say that this asset is the one asset that's going to run all of payments, or for example,
Right.
but just like you say, there's very particular needs that particular institutions might have, or individuals or companies might have, and that they're going to require their own specific technology that's like perfect for them.
Right.
So isn't one stroke of a brush. And I appreciate
Yeah, I
that,
think
that
you
outlook.
need to have a few options there. I mean, listen, man, there's maximalists that look at, the EVM space and think that perhaps everything goes kind of EVM based, and perhaps in the long term future, one global kind of network for everybody, and you can control the privacy and so on and so forth. We're miles away from that. So what do you do in the meantime? We can't just wait for the cathedral to be built. We've got to get our prayers every day, and we've got to kind of every day you got to be kind of you still got to be operating, and you've got to be evolving. And so it seems logical to me that we'll take steps towards a potential future. We don't know what that looks like. There's 2 or 3 that are emerging, but for now, certainly for the short to medium term, it makes sense to me that there'll be different tools for different kind of jobs to be done.
Yeah, it's all the groundwork's being put in right now, and
Right.
and it'll lead where it's going to lead. But I tend to fall on the side of focusing on payments personally, rather than the Internet of Things. I know that integrates with payments slightly, and micropayments or whatever. Through
Yeah.
I see that through IOTA, but my focus and the focus of this channel is really on the assets that can settle vast amounts of payments, and we focus typically on the wholesale side of things.
Yes.
So that's where the focus is. We tend to believe that Ripple and XRP seem to be a good fit for the settlement of funds at that scale. And I'm sure there'll be contenders to that suit different nations. For example, like unbanked nations, there will be other assets that will
Right.
suit them
Right.
better. I'm really conscious about how there's been a overlap between R3 and Ripple in the past. I don't know where that is right now. I'm not going to try and probe with that. Just find my avenue to learn more about R3 has been via learning about Ripple and XRP. Which space, as my final question, which space within this interoperability thing, we got payments, Internet of Things, smart contracts, which area has you most excited?
Well, the area that really excites me, just to kind of pick on payments for a second, because you said it 3-4 times. When I think of payments, I think of, and I don't know whether this analogy sticks with everybody, but it kind of sticks in my mind. Like, payments really are the roads, right? And what goes over those roads are the instruments, right? Like cars, right? That you put in different types of cars go on the road, right? But the payment or the plumbing for payments is the road. And today, most of that plumbing is in place. And what the instruments are messages. You just send messages through the pipe, right? It's like MT messages, MX messages, different types of protocols. And what those messages are doing they're moving debits and credits on ledgers, right? Used to be $10 on Lewis's account. Now it's $10 on Ricardo's account, right? So, the instruments is what's really exciting, because those are changing. It's no longer messages. These are like, tokens, perhaps. The difference, and we don't need to go into the difference between token-based and account-based type of instruments, but what's exciting is token-based instruments that carry logic and some controls and so on. That's really interesting. And then if you extrapolate that, the other really interesting thing is, today payment systems, payment rails, and plumbing are completely separate to asset instruments and asset plumbing. So when I buy a car, I have to go through DVLA, and I have to go through a whole bunch of different systems to change the registration and ownership of that car. And then separately, I go to the bank and I move money to an individual who I'm buying. But those things are not correlated. and they aren't synchronized in any way. What's really exciting is to bring these things together and collapse them so that the car and the money just exchange immediately.
Yeah.
Right. So, the digitization or the tokenization of assets, and we're seeing a lot of that, properties and cars and, what have you, fractional ownership of stuff. That's really cool. Of course, if you take it to the capital markets, the tokenization of equities and bonds and debt and so on. And then eventually new money instruments, and then the ability to real-time settle across DVP. That's really cool. I think that's really...
I tend to agree. I love all of that stuff. There's a program online called, I'm sure you've heard of it, but I never can remember it. It's like IFTTT or something. It's like an automation thing. I love that because I love the idea of setting everything in place and then it just does it. And I think that's what interoperability is: smart contracts, tokenization.
Exactly. All these things come together to facilitate real-time kind of cross-border DVP. Like, I can just settle anything with any instrument that I'm comfortable with globally.
Yeah.
That's cool. Fun. That's cool. So if we can, that's the goal. Like, let's get there for now.
Yeah. So just going back to the analogy that you said about the road, I love that one. I usually use the rails one, like the train system, but it's the same thing. So are you perhaps suggesting that the road is already built and it's just what goes on the road that is TBD?
Well, I'd say to you that, there's a whole bunch of plumbing in place today, of course, right? Payments happen today.
Yeah.
And it happens arguably in a less efficient way than we could kind of execute. And so what I'm saying is that there exists plumbing today that may be useful, but we are also going to have to lay new plumbing, right? Because this notion of distributed ledger tech and blockchains carries a lot of benefit, or potential benefit, promise.
Right.
And so this is the journey. This is the exploration. Like, how do we take something we've been using for decades and evolve that to be a much more efficient kind of stack and infrastructure? And will we take some of the old and bring it into the new? Do we rip and replace? I mean, these are the questions of old. We always, as you look at old systems and replace them with new, sometimes like you're at a point in time where you completely kind of throw away the old, the horse and the cart versus the car, right? You didn't bring some of that with you. You just left it behind, I suspect that we're not at the horse and the cart level right now. Right. I suspect that we will take some of what we've got, but we will have to evolve some of what we got in order for it to participate.
Yeah.
Right. So
the way I kind of see it with the road analogy, going back to that, I think it's actually really good. You don't really change the roads very often. They usually have the roads in, the stuff on them changes, they update, and the cars get better and they change. But the roads don't really change that often. So when you do change them, it's quite a big upheaval and it's probably there to stay.
It is. It's very sticky. You'd say that, we move from dust roads to small kind of country roads to bigger roads to highways to motorways to, so we are evolving kind of these things, just to stick to that analogy. It's gonna give us enough until it doesn't. But, the point being is, we are having to make them bigger and more kind of robust, and they carry different instruments now. They're not just carrying a message, an instruction. Hey, Lewis, move this debit and that credit. They now carry the actual money itself. Yeah. The instrument is now arriving, and the instrument has a whole bunch of logic.
Yeah.
And so the endpoints are going to change, so and the rails have to change, the roads have to change in order to accommodate this new instrument. So
well, yeah. I truly appreciate your time. It's been very, very insightful. Thank you so much. I always think if I had just paid more attention at school, I maybe could have got a job at somewhere like R3, because it's like I love it. I love it all. And you've kind of confirmed that to me in this conversation as well. So truly appreciate it.
My pleasure, Lewis.
Is there anything you want the audience to be paying attention to at R3 that's happening in the near future?
Oh, good question. Well, I think, depending on the audience, I mean, a retail audience, you'll probably never hear of us, and maybe that's our goal. What happens behind the light switch. But on the business and the kind of the private and public side, I mean, with the work that we're doing, certainly in the minting side of instruments, like how do you create these instruments and put them to work? I mean, we're doing a tremendous amount of really exciting work kind of in the issuance side. How do you issue these things legally compliant, aligned to regulation? They can be money instruments from a central bank or a private kind of institution, commercial bank, or they could be digital assets in the form of equities, kind of debt and securities and so on. So, if you're thinking about how you get involved in digital currencies and digital assets, well, there's probably 4 or 5 organizations you want to be talking to, and I'd suggest you that R3 is probably one of them.
Yeah, and I would agree, if that means anything.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Yeah, again, thank you for your time.
Cool.
And I hope that we get to speak again soon.
Thank you, Lewis. Thanks so much for the invite.
No worries.